Self-care is also not toxic positivity. It's not ignoring the fact that something is really wrong. It's not suppressing or dismissing genuine emotions and thoughts, right? Don't do that in the name of self-care, because that's not self-care. Welcome to the Key to Consistency, where your host, Rakia Collins, after dealing with years of her own inconsistent behavior, is now on a quest to help you save time and cultivate your best self by mastering consistency in your life, one area at a time. Welcome to the Key to Consistency. I am your host, Rakia Collins, and on today's episode, we are going to be exploring the relationship between consistency and self-care. So when we hear self-care, there are a lot of ways you can think about self-care. Self-care means so many different things to different people because of the times we're living in, because of social media, because of things you might have heard from those you love. And so before we kind of dive into any topic specifically around self-care, I want to just take some time to share with you guys my definition of what self-care is, right? One, to me, self-care is not a luxury. And so as we go throughout today's episode, I want you to remove that. If that is your association with the term self-care, is that it has to be this luxurious thing. It has to be the facials and the massages, and I have to be able to spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on self-care. Hopefully you'll learn something from today's episode that will encourage you just to shift that perspective, because that's not always the case. That's not always the case. Now, it can be the case, but I do want to emphasize that it's not always the case at all. So that's number one. Number two is that self-care is not optional. It is fundamental. It is fundamental to maintain a healthy and a balanced life. There is no way you can show up for yourself and be the best version of yourself that you could possibly ever be if self-care is not a part of your routine, if self-care is not a part of your regimen, right? And self-care, to be clear, at least in my opinion, it encompasses a lot of things, a lot of different practices, right? Like the importance of prioritizing your physical aspect of yourself, your spiritual, your mentals, your emotions, all of those require their own level of self-care. And so as we go throughout today's episode, I really want you guys to remember that one, self-care is not a luxury, and two, it is a fundamental fact. It is not optional. It is not negotiable, right? And you can even merge those two together because they are very similar. Do not think that taking care of yourself is an option, because it is not. It is and should be your priority. So the first thing that I want to get into when we think about self-care is going to be the physical portion of self-care, right? So this is going to include things like fitness and nutrition and making sure that you value your sleep, right? Of course, when we think about exercise, I'm sure you've heard it time and time again. You've probably read it, and you honestly probably just know it, right? Exercise is so important to us as humans because it allows our bodies to release endorphins. And if you don't know what an endorphin is, just think about it as our body's natural mood elevators, right? So when we release those endorphins, that's why it's hard, and I almost want to use the word impossible, to have anxiety and be working out at the same time. Because if you're truly focusing on that workout, if you're truly focusing on your mind to body connection when you're working out, and you're truly working on making sure you perform that rep accurately and appropriately so that way you don't injure yourself, the anxiety, the depression, the negativity will slowly begin to ease away because you're moving your body. Movement can really elevate you mentally. It can really elevate you emotionally. So I would encourage you that if physically you don't feel like moving, it may not even be an hour and a half. Find 30 minutes where you can just move, where You can go for a walk, whether you just, play a YouTube video that has someone working out and you're following along, you're doing the dancing, the Zumba or the Pilates, right? Like whatever it is that you need to do, I would just encourage you to move because your body requires it, right? It is not something that should be looked upon as optional. It really is something that is a non-negotiable, if you will, right? And so when we think about our physical self-care, of course, outside of working out, there's also that aspect of nutrition, right? When we think about a balanced diet and nutrients that help fuel our body so we can show up as our authentic self, right? If you can, I would encourage you to incorporate a variety of fruits and veggies and proteins and fats and all that good stuff into your diet, right? Because when you eat well, nutrition has an obvious link to mental health, right? Things like eating, salmon for your omega-3 fatty acids as an example, right? Like those acids particularly have the potential to reduce symptoms of depression, right? And so I would encourage you to make sure that not only are you, I hate to say forcing, but you sometimes have to force yourself, even if it's something that doesn't necessarily come natural to you. It's crazy because some of the best things, the things that we know we should do, are the things that do not come natural to us. They're things that we have to force ourselves to do, but it is so worth it, because if you don't force yourself to do it, you'll end up paying a grave consequence, right? And so I would encourage you to think about what you're putting in your body and how often you're moving your body, because your body is like a muscle, right? Like it's made up of muscles, of course, but it is like a muscle. Like your body reacts differently given the context of the situation. So to make that statement make sense, I remember because I work out a lot, I went a month without working out. Right? Yes, I picked up weight, but I did not pick up as much weight as I thought I would. Why? Because my body had already learned, like, hey, this is the rate at which we burn fat. Even if she's not working out as hard as she used to, we know that we can't hold on to this because this is not normal for us, right? Like my body wasn't holding on to as much weight as I thought it would when I stopped working out. And so that for me was just amazing and shocking, to say the least, because I was like, well, I knew I was going to gain a smooth 20 pounds because I stopped working out for a month, and I might have picked up 10, maybe 7 to 10 pounds. And I was like, wow, I thought it was remarkable for me to know that because I had put in so much before and I had trained my body. Of course, I picked up weight because naturally you're going to when you're not moving. But my body was like, this is not our ready state, right? And because of that, my body had a certain level of discipline to it. So I say that to say, if you don't put anything in, you can't get anything out. It's like going to your bank and putting in your code and requesting $30, but you don't have $30 in your account. Because my body already had so many deposits when I didn't have anything to give, it was still able to be maintained. And so hopefully that makes sense to you guys when you think about your physical well-being and, just physically making sure that you're taking care of yourself. It's because we want to put ourselves in a position where we ultimately always have a balance. Right? We always have something in your account that you're consistently adding to. But of course, there may be times where you have to take away as well. And if you have to take away or remove something from that, you ultimately will still be in the position to not be in the negative because you always put in more than you take out. And so that was a slight little tangent on physical health, but I do want to get back to the final layer of physical self-care, which is going to be adequate sleep. In a culture that prioritizes the grind, that prioritizes get up and go, no sleep, we got this. Sorry guys, I don't know why I did that, but in a culture that really prioritizes that grind and that hustle, I am here to tell you, yes, there is a time and a space where that energy may be necessary, but that should not be your like standard. That should not be normal to you. Not because you can't do it, but because as humans, we weren't designed to live that way, right? When you do not have quality rest and quality sleep for your brain to consolidate memories and to repair tissues and to regulate hormones, because those are the things that happen while you sleep. If your brain cannot do that, things like chronic sleep deprivation, they are associated with health issues, including cardiovascular disease and mood disorders, because your body doesn't have time to sleep and doesn't have time to regulate the things that it normally would be able to regulate, right? And so I would encourage you, as we kind of wrap up the physical piece of self-care, to prioritize your sleep as much as you can. I understand that it may not be easy, especially if you have a husband and you have young ones and you're taking care of everyone else before you take care of yourself. Do what you have to do to put yourself in a position where you have at least 10 to 20 to 30, if not more, minutes to yourself to prioritize your physical well-being, right? Nutrition, making sure that you meal prep, right? Meal prepping is, I'm sure, especially if you have a larger family, is going to help you, because you're going to be able to make sure that you're not just feeding your family anything, but that you are giving them the things that are going to help maintain their bodies, while also making sure that you have time to actually cook it, right? And then, of course, making sure that exercise is a part of your routine, right? Again, whether you have to get your kids off the bus and they know, hey, when I get off the bus with mom, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go for a walk, right? And once we go for that walk, we're going to go into the house, and then that's when we're going to, do our homework, and then we're going to do whatever else we have to do, right? Like, I want to say to stop making excuses, because the one thing that I've learned as of late, just in my own life and dealing with my own things, is that the life that you have, or the lack of the life that you have, is based upon your decisions. Right. And I think that for me, especially for this physical piece, as I just mentioned to you guys, I hadn't been working out. And that's very strange for me, because I'm pretty much a 4:30 in the morning type of gal. Right. And so knowing that if I don't go back into the gym and I don't go back and work out, I know what's going to happen. That 7 to 10 pounds is going to eventually become 30. It may take a lot longer, but it's going to get there. Right. And so for me, I have just gone into a space mentally where you're going to live your life that you want to live, or you're just not. Right. And you cannot be emotionally angry because you don't have the life that you want to live. And that is going to segue me great into the emotional portion of self-care, because when you focus on journaling, or you focus on mindfulness, or you focusing on seeking support from those around you, those are going to be key pillars to help you build up your emotional well-being, and really making sure that you're prioritizing emotional self-care. Your emotions are really, if I were to think about my emotional self-care routine, it really is one of those things where, for me personally, my emotions are very, very, very closely tied to God. And so when I don't feel like myself, and I'm feeling a bit angry, or I'm feeling, just any way that's just not like my normal calm self, like, I know, okay, you have not been in the Word. You have not spent time with God. And for me, the reason why I connect the two together is because God is love, right? He is it. It's not something that he possesses. It's something that he is. And because that is the case, I know that when I am the opposite of love, it's because I haven't spent time with the one who is love. And so that's, for me, how I regulate my emotional self-care. I get into my Word, right? But outside of reading the Bible, there are other things as well that you can do, like journaling, right? Writing down your thoughts, or even if you don't want to write, if you want to leverage the voice recorder app on your phone and just speak your thoughts out loud and just record them, go for it, right? Like, your emotions and how you feel is really important to self-care, because if you don't regularly know how to manage and express yourselves fully in that moment, it's ultimately going to damage your perception of yourself along with how you show up in the world, right? For a person who can effectively manage their emotions, it allows you to build positive relationships, and it makes coping with life's challenges and stressors a lot easier, especially when one, you know how to regulate your own emotions, but two, you've now partnered with someone who also knows how to regulate and to manage their emotions as well. It is by far, I'd say, the most critical thing that you can do to make sure that you manage yourself and you manage your emotions. Even if you find that you may need to go to therapy to talk to someone, you may need to talk to a trusted friend or a family member, right? Like, knowing that you are struggling emotionally is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength because you are so in tune with yourself to where you know what your normal looks like. And that is key. Because you know what normal is for you emotionally, you are able to say, I am not in the space where I need to be. I would say it is where you don't recognize that is where we have a problem, because you don't know enough about your own emotions to be able to say, this is not my standard. Right? So I would encourage you, if you know that you're going through something that is too deep and that mindfulness and journaling is not going to help, and you need something more, you need to talk to someone, make sure that you talk to a therapist, or again, a trusted friend or a trusted family member that is going to help you take steps to a more balanced and more fulfilling life, right? When we think about, we talked about the emotional pieces of self-care. We've talked about the physical pieces of self-care, but I really want to talk to you guys about what self-care is not, because the things that we've been talking about, working out and getting good sleep and journaling, right, and having a support group around you, those are not temporary. If you really think about it, having a good exercise routine is not temporary. Eating a well-balanced diet is not temporary. Journaling and mindfulness should not be temporary, right? Like, those are things that are long-term. And I say that to say self-care is not synonymous with temporary pleasures that lead to long-term discomfort, right? The temporary pleasure of, well, I'm going to just drink this away, or I'm going to just go out and smoke this away. Like, those are temporary pleasures, but they ultimately lead to long-term discomfort, because those aren't truly self-care. Like, that's not truly what self-care is. When you think about, to put this in a practical example, if we go back to something emotional, let's say you're going through a breakup, right? I am from someone who has had her heart broken a few times in her life. And I'm sure, many of you guys have as well. When you get your heart broken and you play those sad songs that are just gonna they're just going to make you feel better, because you're going to cry, and they make you feel worse because you're like, man, look at my life. But they make you feel better because you're like, someone else has gone through the same thing, and I can sing a song and feel connected to the fact that someone else has gone through this. Someone else has had their heart broken. But what does that ultimately lead us to? For those of us who have a different relationship with food, it can force you to eat more, right? And what does that do? You engage in foods that you don't normally eat, or that you don't normally eat a lot of, and you start to feel slick, and you start to feel sluggish, and then you have a feeling of guilt and regret. So now you have guilt and regret, and you're heartbroken, and it just becomes a whole thing, right? That's not self-care. That is a short-lived escape from planning for a better future and really doing the root work. And I say this not to condemn anyone, because again, I've been here. I have done that. I have had my heart broken and buried my heart and ice cream and gone out and eat and just done and just did life the way I thought it should have been lived, by trying to drown out my sadness and temporary sorrows and trying to be this person that I knew I wasn't naturally, but it was just like, hey, I don't want to have my heart broken anymore, so I'm going to just eat this bowl of ice cream. And when I think about it now, it's like, where's the correlation? Like, where is your heart being broken? What does that have to do with what you eat? And I'm not saying that to say that, because to some people, they have a lot in common, right? But if you do those things consistently, you're going to consistently destroy what self-care actually is and what it actually is meant for. So I would encourage you that when you think about, some of the good things we talked about earlier about what self-care is, also think about what it's not, right? Self-care is also not toxic positivity. It's not ignoring the fact that something is really wrong. It's not suppressing or dismissing genuine emotions and thoughts, right? Don't do that in the name of self-care, because that's not self-care. It's not constantly pretending to be happy or avoiding and addressing issues that you don't want to, deal with, so you kind of throw it on the back burner. That's not self-care. Like, true self-care acknowledges you have this emotion, you're feeling a way, and you're able to address those emotions even when they are challenging. And that is tough, because boy, oh boy, can they be challenging. And it is so easy to be a passive aggressive person and just fall into this, well, yes, it bothers me, but I'm not going to say anything. That is not self-care. And when you do that consistently, you're going to end up being a person that just holds things in, and you don't want to be that person, right? The last thing I want to mention around kind of what self-care is not escaping your responsibilities at all. Self-care is not a justification to say, well, I'm just going to not do my taxes because in the name of self-care, I'm going to get this massage, right? Like, that's not what self-care is. Self-care is not neglecting things that you committed to do because you want to escape your work. It's not neglecting your relationships because you just don't want to be bothered with people. Balancing self-care with your responsibilities is key in order to live a happy and a healthy and a fulfilling life. As counterintuitive as that may sound, I did not want to end today's episode without focusing on what it's not, because you can go anywhere and people will tell you how to indulge in self-care, but they will not tell you what self-care is not. So hopefully you've learned from today's episode what self-care is with some practical examples and what self-care is not. And it has just encouraged you to help think about how you can build your own self-care routine, right? Establish what that routine looks like. Maybe take 30 minutes out of your day, whether it's during a weekday or a weekend, and really put pen to paper and figure out, okay, what is self-care actually, right? Like, what does self-care actually mean to me? And what is something that I can do in my routine to actually prioritize self-care, right? Making sure that, again, you seek that support and that accountability when you are struggling, or even if you're not struggling and you just want someone in your corner to help you go through this journey of prioritizing self-care. It could honestly make them want to prioritize their own self-care routine, right? So grab a friend, join a support group, and exchange self-care goals and really support each other and really dive into the fact that you are doing something amazing that is ultimately going to ensure that you live a balanced and a healthy life. And so, of course, the last thing I want to do before we end today's episode is I want to go into the book that is literally the Word of Life. And we're going to focus on Matthew 11, verse 28 through 30. And the word says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Guys, always remember that you are never in this alone, that you have a God that cares so much about you, and He wants you to know that you can give your cares to Him because He absolutely cares for you. So remember, guys, consistency breeds mastery and transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Bye, guys.